This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. Keep moving with Australia's #1 address in property.
It's great to have your company here on Business Now. Let's take you around the property markets from over the weekend and see how those home auction markets did fare. Well, nationally, there were around 2,130 auctions. That's around 500 up on last week when, of course, there was public holidays in many of the states. Around 58% of those properties in total were sold. In Sydney, 808 auctions. The clearance rate here a touch under 57%. Melbourne played a bit of catch-up after that public holiday, 817 auctions. Its success rate just under 68%. Brisbane, a little busier, 108 auctions. The clearance rate is paltry, though, just under 39%. Adelaide seems to be almost coming off the boil, 84 auctions, but the clearance rate there, 65.5%. In Canberra, 64 auctions, 64% cleared. And Perth had just 6 auctions and 4 sold, but it's traditionally stronger in private sales. So let's bring in here Eleanor, Creagh, Senior Economist with REA Group. Eleanor, thanks for your time. Can I just start with Melbourne? Do you sense that there's signs of a bit of a market turnaround here? It's clearly been a pretty tough market for people there.
It certainly has, and Melbourne is the capital city that has really underperformed for the past 4 years and seen the weakest home price growth throughout that period. We have seen that February's rate cut has boosted sentiment, and we've seen that auction clearance rates in Melbourne have certainly strengthened relative to the back end of last year throughout the spring selling season, where we saw more properties hitting the market and those auction clearance rates coming off. This also lines up with what we're seeing in terms of the Westpac consumer sentiment data, looking specifically at the time to buy a dwelling index. And we've seen that actually in Victoria, that index has flipped from pessimistic to optimistic. So there's now more consumers in Victoria that are optimistic about it potentially being a good time to buy a dwelling. So all in all, it looks like we are poised for some sort of a recovery in terms of Melbourne's housing market conditions over the coming months, likely spurred on, of course, by that increase in confidence that we're seeing with respect to February's interest rate cut.
So just tell me a little bit about the time on market in Melbourne, because quite clearly, if you looked at what, give or take 70% of the properties sold over the weekend, that's 817. So that means there's, well, the best part of 200 properties still sitting out there unsold or up for negotiation or whatever. But that's been happening for quite some time. So there must be a bit of an overhang now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've seen that with the increase in total stock on market, that the time taken to sell a home has also drifted higher over the past couple of years. We know that buyers in Melbourne have had really a lot more choice than is historically the case, and a lot more choice relative to other capital city markets as well. And that has been one of the factors that has led to that weaker home price growth momentum that we've seen in Melbourne for much of the past couple of years, with that stock on market, or the increase in stock on market being a key contributor there. We have seen in February that those home price falls we were seeing in Melbourne did reverse, and actually Melbourne has led the country in terms of monthly home price growth in February for both houses and units for the first time since 2020. So we're starting to, I think, accumulate those little pieces of evidence that relative weakness that we've seen in Melbourne for much of the past couple of years is potentially starting to shift, and probably actually, I guess, the comparative affordability that maybe we're seeing emerging in Melbourne after this period of underperformance also playing into this potential recovery in housing market conditions in Melbourne.
And some of the strongest markets in Adelaide, in Brisbane, in Perth, which had overtaken Melbourne in price, in annual price, that seems to be now starting to return a little bit as well.
So some of those markets that we've seen have really outperformed over the past 5 years. You know, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, home prices up around 80% in each of those markets over the past 5 years. They've been the strongest with respect to home price growth, again, for much of the past 2 years. And they're continuing to lead the country in terms of price growth over the past year. But you're right in looking at those markets, and we can see that not only is there's some cooling in the momentum with respect to auction activity, but we're also seeing that in terms of home price growth.
Many thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.